Hi, I'm Holly of Hollyana Calligraphy. I'm a calligrapher and a watercolor artist. My goal is to get you creating. I know the hardest part is just understanding all of the information out there and figuring out where do I just begin. So this is a very simple tutorial for someone who is just starting out. We're gonna go through techniques such as wet on wet and wet on dry, but it's gonna be in a form where you can't mess it up, I promise. I've created a template with the alphabet and leaves running through them all. So we're gonna actually be making a print today. Here's one I have made already. It's Hallelujah. And we're basically just going to be painting in the template of the letters and the leaves. What's great about my template that you can go download in my shop is that you can create any phrase or saying with this template, or even just a letter, like the first letter of your kid's name to hang on their wall. So if you're ready to get going, I'm gonna show you all the tools you need and we'll get started. The first thing we're going to talk about in tools is watercolor paper, and all the tools I'm going to talk about today are in the link below on my Amazon link, in my Amazon shop, excuse me. This watercolor paper is Canson. You can find it at Hobby Lobby too as well, or Walmart. And it needs to be 140 pound paper. And it's also going to be cold press. Let's see right here. Cold press paper. Cold press means it has some toothy texture to it. If you can see that, it's not going to be smooth. So when the watercolor is on the paper, the water actually absorbs into the paper and just doesn't stand on the top. So you need a nice toothy textured paper. The next thing you're going to need is paints. Now, if you have these at home, these are my kids' paints. These are fine. What's going to happen with these paints, and here's one of the E's that I did, you can tell the watercolor doesn't blend very well. The paint just isn't as beautiful, and I'll show you, here's the other one I did. See how beautiful that paint really blends in there? So this is this kind of paint, and these paints are Cotman watercolors, Winsor & Newton Cotman. This is a student grade paint that's more affordable than their higher end line, which there's their professional. These are still can be quite pricey. So my rule of thumb is if you are going to use these paints, then go and do it. I'd rather you have less quality and you actually practice than having these high-end paints that just sit in your closet and never get used. So that's my 2 cents about paint. Start where you're at today. So if this is what you have today, go for it. But these are my absolute favorite, and they do make a difference. These are also pure pigment. These have less filler in them than these cakes. That's why these are more affordable. But you go for it, whatever you have. The next thing you're going to need are these really tiny brushes. This one is an 18-0 and this one is a 00. The last thing you'll need is my Watercolor Alphabet template. It has a ton of more information about tools. It has the complete alphabet, and then it also has some sayings like hallelujah, wonder, already printed out for you. The great part about this alphabet is that you can take one of the letters, enlarge it if you just want to do a single letter for a print, or you can make your own print with a word that you wanted. Say you wanted kindness. So you would just put your watercolor paper over the top, put it up to a window, and see how you can see right through the paper, and then just trace each letter until you spell kindness. So this alphabet really is so useful. It has so many different aspects that you can use to make your own custom print. To make this easier, I'm going to show you how to trace it out on a light pad. But if you don't have a light pad at home, all you're going to do is put your letter underneath and put it up to a window and then trace through it. See how easily you can see it through? But I'm just going to trace it on the light pad so you can easily see on the video. Make sure you trace lightly. You don't want really hard and harsh lines so that when we are done painting at the end, we can easily erase them. So with your watercolors, if you have the Cotman ones, or even if you don't, if you have the cakes, they come liquid in tubes, and then you put them into each little pan, and then they dry overnight. You want them to dry until they're hard. These are all hard and not wet anymore. This will help you not use and waste paint. One of my favorites is Ultramarine, is what I'm using right now. And then I add some sap green, and that mutes it a little bit. So I'm going to be using some blue today for the letters, and then some green for the leaves. And this is one of the reasons why I love these paints. These paints mix so well and they blend so nicely, so you can get all of the custom colors that you're really wanting if you don't want super bright colors. So this is about how much paint you're going to need. A lot of the times I use a bigger brush when I'm mixing because it goes a little bit faster. But that's about how much paint you need to start with your E. So the first technique we're going to be learning is wet on wet. So what that means is that your paper is wet and then you add wet paint to it. So the first thing I want you to do is grab just your wet brush. You're putting it in the water and getting it really wet, and then just dab it on the edge, and we're going to be coloring in all of the top part of the E and getting it really wet. Let's see, can you see that? So we're just getting this wet, and then we're going to take our blue that we mixed, and I just want you to dab it in, and when you dab it in, you can see how it bleeds really well. And this is called wet on wet. Wet on wet gives you really nice bleeding and blending. And it also gives you some really beautiful tones and hues to the blue. So with watercolor, you get a lot, if you have a lot of paint on your brush, you will get darker color like this. And then as you add water, it gets lighter. So we don't use a white paint with watercolor. We just use more water. And as this dries, it's going to be really, really beautiful. You want all these splotches. You don't want it all this dark color because it gives it depth and dimension. If you add light tones and then dark tones. So keep going, keep painting with water, adding water in, adding more paint in, and just kind of dabbing and smushing it all around. Okay, so now that we're done with the E, we're gonna do the leaves, and we're gonna leave the stem for last, but let's mix some green. I'm gonna turn you around so you can see the greens I have. This is called sap green, and it looks almost black, but this is the one we're gonna be using. And it has some really like limey colors to it. And we're gonna add a tiny bit of red to mute it. So here's my red over here, just a tiny bit. And it's gonna mute it a bit. And that's all you need for the leaves. Okay, so we're gonna do the same thing. We're gonna go in and we're gonna add a little bit of paint this time, and then take your brush, dip it in, drag it across the lip, and then go in with the water and kind of blend it. So see, you have some dark on the edge, and then some really nice, just muted tones over here. We're gonna keep doing that. And remember, you don't want it all one color, one hue, one tone. You can even drop in some right there and see how that bleeds so nicely. So really, you can't mess this up. As long as you're staying in the lines and painting by the little shapes, you're good. Okay, and then right here, I'm gonna show you, if it's still a little bit wet, you can drop in and see how drop in some paint and see how it's bleeding really nicely. And then we can see right here as this is dried so beautifully, it has a really nice edge and then really muted on the other side. So this is how you do the wet on wet technique on both of them. Now that once this is mostly dry, the E, and you can tell it's mostly dry by just touching it, you can do what we're going to call wet on dry, which is wet paint on dry paper. And that way it won't bleed. Wet on wet makes that bleeding look really nice and blending. Wet on dry will make a very nice straight line and it won't bleed into the paper. So we're just going to use the same color and add a little bit of black. So here's my black. We're going to add a little bit of black and a little bit of brown to that green. And it's going to just make it a little darker to add some contrast. So we're going to start down here. And with this, instead of smushing it sideways, we're going to actually turn our paintbrush at a 90-degree angle. And we're just going to barely touch the tip. And it's okay if it's kind of wiggly, because branches are kind of wiggly, but you really just want to use the very tip of the brush to make that stem. And you see how that's going into the already painted part and it's not blending. So that means that part is dry and this is wet on dry. So keep doing that stem and don't worry if it's wiggly. Don't worry if it's not perfect, not a perfect line. And we want to drop in some darker spots. See how it's darker there and a little bit lighter there? We just want it to be kind of imperfect. That's why this little template and guide is very easy for beginners and very good for first timers. So once your E is dried, you can frame it. At IKEA, they have these really cute frames that are 5x7, and we're just gonna plop it in. But first I wanted to show you just the difference with paints. The difference of blending. So these are two of the same prints that I made, one with the Cotman colors and this one with the cheaper cakes from Hobby Lobby for just kids to use. And so you can just tell it doesn't blend as well and it leaves it really streaky, and these paints really do a beautiful job blending and creating those really great bleeds and marks to show the depth and all of that. The last thing you want to do is erase your pencil lines. This is called a kneaded eraser. It's really pliable and it also, it doesn't leave erasing dust. That's the great part about it. And it also takes away the pencil lines, but not the paint. So we're just gonna go in and really finely, well, I'm pressing pretty hard, take away some of the pencil marks. And they're mostly gone. Let's try getting those a little bit gone. And the great part, like I said, is it's not leaving any dust and it's keeping the paint where it is. So there it is. So you can go and erase as much as you want and you're done, ready to put into a frame. This project is really easy to add more letters to your work and create your own custom print with your own phrase, maybe a name across this way. It's whatever you really want to make of it. I'd love to see what you create out of my alphabet. So tag me at Holly Anna Calligraphy, or you can email me at hello@hollyannacalligraphy.com.